Guys, welcome back to Sweet Yellow House, and today we have a compilation video for you. It is our 5 most favorite projects that we've done, and if you haven't subscribed, please do. And let's get started with this. Project 1 is a frame and portrait. This was actually painted that I got from the Goodwill, and this is the inspiration piece. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to grab this linen white from Rust-Oleum, and I'm going to mix that with some water, and I want to water it down so that I can keep the texture from the original portrait. And I did about 3 coats on top of that, but they were, like I said, the paint's watered down, so they're very thin coats, so I was able to keep some of that texture. So once that was dry, I grabbed the Mod Podge and I mixed also that with some water, and I went over the paint because I wanted to seal the white paint so that it wouldn't be affected by any of the other processes that are going to go on. So I did 2 coats over that, letting it dry in between coats. So once that was dry, I grabbed my liquid patina and my decoupage paper that I got from Jamie Ray Vintage, and I decided that I was going to start in the middle of that canvas, and I'm laying my decoupage or my patina down, and I'm going to then apply the decoupage paper there. So I'm starting in the middle so I can work my way out. I'm going to do one side and then the other. So I'm just making sure that that liquid patina is put down on every section of that, and I don't have any dry spots. If you have dry spots, what's going to happen is that you're going to then get air bubbles in there because that paper will not stick down. So I'm grabbing some saran wrap to help push that down. It is very much it glides over that paper. There's no friction, and so it helps you kind of push that down without being too rough on that paper, because that paper is gentle and it will tear on you, especially when it's wet with the decoupage medium that you're using. So I just am making sure that I'm getting every inch of that canvas covered with the liquid patina, and I'm going in sections and then moving along with my saran wrap and pushing that down. This was the first time that I had did this kind of project. Well, decoupage especially, I've never done it before, and especially then, of course, the first time I do it, I'm doing it on a fairly big project. But you know, it is easy if you know the fundamentals. It's not that hard. You just have to be gentle is probably the biggest advice I can give you, and you know, set it up, think about it, set it up to where it's comfortable with you. For me, doing it in sections was just a lot more handleable for me. Like I was able to handle it in sections instead of thinking of doing it all at one time. So do as I say, not as I do. And I said earlier that you're not supposed to work this paper or press a lot, and of course I did that, and I ripped the paper, as you could see here. So at this point I panicked and thought I had ruined the whole piece. So at that, I just decided that I was going to smooth it out the best I could and move along with my project to decide what I was going to do. It was very gentle with trying to get that smoothed out, and I was just patting it with my finger to put it down. I was afraid it was going to rip off in my hand, so I cut off the excess, moved along with my project, cut off with the excess, and I decided to patch it. So I cut a piece of the cut off section that matched that part, and I basically just patched it in there using my finger and patting it down and putting the liquid patina in there to hold that down, and it worked out fairly well. You can't even tell that after it was all dry that I actually even fixed it, so I was really happy with the way that it came out. Once that was drying, I decided that I was going to cover up some of the nicks and scratches that were in the frame. The frame is in really good shape, but it did have a lot of scrapes and nicks in there. So I grabbed this Farm Fresh. That's the color I decided on, and I watered it down just a smidge, and I decided to paint just the green part of the frame, leaving the gold intact. I did 2 light coats going over the areas, the green area, and since the paint was watered down, it didn't do it wasn't really thick and thick paint going on there, and it did a really nice job. I was really happy with the color that came out of that. While that paint was drying, I grabbed my gold gilding wax, and I decided to freshen up that gold part of the frame to again cover up the nicks and scratches that were there. Once all of that was dry, the paint was dry and the gilding wax had been on there and dried, I decided to go over it with some clear wax, the DIY clear wax, to seal everything in. And also what that's going to do is going to darken that Farm Fresh color to closer to a color that I was wanting. I just buffed that in really well, and that's going to help seal all that stuff in and give it some protection. Once I got it on there with the brush, I just buffed it in with a rag, and then I decided that I was going to go over some of the gold areas that I had touched up with the new gold wax there. It was just a little too bright and didn't fit in with the rest of the patina of the frame, so I just decided to go over that. So I grabbed some linen white and some Java color brown paint, some DIY old schools, which is like a gray, and this black, and I decided to mix up some paint. I didn't mix it all together. I just basically poured each color in a cup, and then I just kind of used the edge of that paper to pounce out that paint, just to kind of mix it in. What I'm going for here is a border, because that decoupage paper was not tall enough to cover that whole canvas, so I'm just kind of camouflaging that edge and kind of trying to make everything look cohesive. I'm actually going inside of the picture as well, over more of the center, and just to kind of make everything look cohesive with that camouflage paint that I put around the outer part of it. After all of the paint was dry and all the layers had dried, I grabbed my liquid patina again, and I'm gonna put one coat over the top, and I'm still being fairly light with this because that paper is still, it's not, the top of it is not sealed, so you just still want to be gentle. You don't want to be scrubbing that very hard at all, and I'm just putting a lighter coat on there just to get an initial seal on there. So once that's dry, the first coat there, I let it dry probably overnight. You don't have to, but I let it dry overnight, and I just did a second coat. I went back in and did a second coat, but now that it has that initial coat over top, you can be a little bit more vigorous with the second coat to seal everything in. I was really happy the way this came out. It being my first time doing a project of this size and decoupaging that I'd never really done before, I was really happy with the end product of that. So project 2 are these 2 wood frames. I'm not sure if they're wood. They look like wood, but here's the inspiration piece. I got the frames from the Goodwill, I believe, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take some linen white from Rust-Oleum, and I'm going to mix that with some baking soda, and I'm going to then start putting some coats on these frames. I did about 2 coats. I didn't mix a really heavy ratio of paint to baking soda, but enough to get some nice texture there. And like I said, I did about 2 coats of the paint baking soda mixture to cover the frames. I let those dry, and while I was drying, I was trying to mix up some paint that was closest to the blue inspiration piece, and I decided on 2 sets of blue, 2 different types of blue, some white and black paint, and I mixed that all together until I got a blue that I was happy with. You can see here that I tried different ratios of colors. I have a lot of the little stir sticks there that have a lot of different colors on them, so it's trial and error, especially when you're mixing your own custom colors. I really wish I would have wrote that combination down, because I really regret not taking better notes. I don't even begin to know if I would be able to mix this color up again. I doubt it, but oh well. So after, I'm gonna do 2 coats of that blue on there, making sure that I got some really good coverage. And while that's drying, I'm gonna grab my IOD birdsong mold and my Prima aviary mold, and I'm not sure they make this mold anymore. You would have to research that. So I used my amazing casting resin, and I'm just made some molds using these 2, and really I'm not really sure what I'm gonna do, but I know I want to use these 2 molds and the elements from these, so I'm just gonna start making some random molds that I think I could be using. The amazing casting resin is, I wouldn't recommend it for fine detailed molds like I'm doing here. It's very hard to control, and so if you're able to do that, then that's great, but for me, using a very detailed mold like the one from Prima was really hard. So once I got those set up and cured, I popped them out, and I started to begin an arrangement around my frames that I thought looked good. This is the hardest part for me. I have a really hard time making decisions, so you just have to kind of do what you feel and put things into place. I use scissors to cut pieces of elements and separate other ones, and so that's what this is. It's art. It's all what looks good to you and how you like things set up, and that's just what crafting is all about. So once I got everything into place, I glued it down with the Titebond, and I let that set up. Once the Titebond was set up, what I did was I got the blue paint that I used before, and I just started to paint over the molds, because when you mold them they come out white. So once I got those glued into place, let the glue set up, I went over those molds with the blue paint. I did about 2 coats over this, that to make sure everything was covered the same and there was no like empty spots or white showing through. I grabbed my white wax and clear wax, and I mixed some of those together. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna mix these together first, and then I'm gonna pour off a little bit of this and mix in the antique wax part. And that is so that I can take down some of the deep color of that wax and use it to antique the frame. Once I got all those mixed together, I'm going to take the clear and the white first, and I'm going to put a layer of that over the frames, and making sure that I get into all of those little crevices, and having that white wax in there is going to add some detail to the frame. That it's not going to be like in your face, but it'll be there in the background and adding something to the frame. So once I get that put on, I wipe it back, put it on, wipe it back, and get it to where I want. And then the next thing I'm going to do is grab that antiquing wax and a really soft brush, and I'm going to apply that around. And you can see how much lighter it is. So I put it on and take it off, and I just dab to get where I want it, and I feather that out along the rest of the frame. I don't want to cover the whole frame, and that's why I'm feathering that out once I get it over those molds. I'm really trying to go for really light antiquing. I'm not going for in your face. You know, I just want it to look like these are old, but not grungy, I guess is what I want to say. So once that is all set up and I got my frames covered where I want, you can see here how light that antiquing is on there. I'm going to take that gold gilding wax and I'm just going to hit those molds. I'm not digging my finger and getting every inch of that. I am just really kind of going and covering the tops of it, so that way some of that blue from the paint is still going to show through that gold. So I'm not going for full coverage here. I'm going for a gilded look, but not crazy Vegas gold. I still want it to be soft. I'm using just a brush to kind of get around the outer part of those molds, just to cover up some of any of the white from the casting that I see. That's why you see me using a brush, just to kind of get some of that detail there. So that's how those came out, and these are so gorgeous. I just so happy with the way that these came out. I'm not even sure I have these. I think maybe somebody in my family walked off with them, wanted them and took them, so I decided that was fine. So project 3, I grabbed these 3 little fake, they're plasticky. The print is actually on the back of that, so I unscrewed that, took it off of there, removed the glass, and what I'm gonna do is wipe these down first and clean off all the dust. And I'm going to go in with I believe this is Aviary from DIY. It's a really nice color green, and I'm going to do a base coat on those frames. I did 2 coats just to get some really good coverage, but I think at this point I'm still trying to decide what I'm gonna do, and so I'm just wasting time by painting twice on them because I'm not even sure that was needed. But I'm gonna grab my paper clay and some Titebond glue, and what I want to do is, once I decided where I wanted everything and what I was gonna do with the frame, I then needed to fill that little crevice there, and so I decided to put some paper clay in there to fill that, to give a more even surface for the molds that I'm gonna make to sit on. So this is a really good way to fill in spaces, because if you don't have a good surface, you know, your molds more than likely will pop off or break through or crack or something. So I used Horse and Hound, and I think the Laurel mold from IOD, and I made some elements there once I got, right now I'm just kind of trying to decide what I want to do, but I know I want to use these two elements from these molds. So I get a design situated out, as you can see on the one, and I just go ahead and start applying that to the other one. I want these to be a set, not exact, but nevertheless a set. So I get those glued down with the Titebond, and I let that set up. Once I have all those down, I'm just using this syringe to fill in any gaps that I see, and it's easier to do it with the needle part on that, so that way you can get in there without having to rip those molds apart. I decided that I'm just gonna cover and paint the backs of those pictures that I took out, and I did that with some white paint. So I'm going back in with my aviary after those molds are dry, and I'm watering that down. The reason that I'm doing that, because it's easier for me at least to get in all those little crevices with this paint, because the paint is really thick when it's watered down. So that's what I decided to do, so that I could get into all those little crevices, and you know they have so much when you're doing a project like this. So I did 2 coats on that. So you could see here I made a boo-boo, and I actually bent one of those leaves back, but I grabbed my syringe with the glue in there, and I was able to fix it with this and get that glue right in there and glue that back down without having to tear anything apart. That syringe just is a game changer when you're doing these kinds of projects. And I'm using the paintbrush to smooth that glue out so that I don't have any like big globs going on, and you can't even tell that it broke. After that paint was set up and everything was dry, I grabbed my DIY white wax, and I'm gonna go over the whole frame with this. I'm using a really soft brush to do this, so that way I can get into all those little crevices with that. If you're using a hard brush, it's hard to get into the little crevices, and then because you have some really fragile pieces here, I was afraid that I would break those off, and I didn't want to do that when I was trying to work that wax inside of those crevices. So I just did a little piece at a time, where I would put the wax on and take it off, making sure that I got in into everywhere. Once that wax set up, I grabbed my gilding gold wax, and I did a light skimming over the top of the molds, and just to bring out a lot of that detail. I didn't go down into the grooves, like I said. I just did a light skim over everything just to bring out the details in the design there. These are lovely, so lovely. And I think these two ended up at one of my family's home. Project 4 is, and here's the inspiration piece, this antique sign. So I grabbed my olive crest mold, paper, clay, and the Titebond. And I have this sign that I did some work on, but I never really finished it. And I had that covered with some chiffon cream, I think, and some baking soda that was already covered from before. So I just went straight in with my mold, and I started making the elements that I wanted to put around my frame, or my sign, sorry. Once I got everything set up, I glued those down, and I let that glue set up as well. Once that was dry, I grabbed my linen white and I mixed that with some fairly heavily baking soda because I wanted some really great texture in this sign. And so I did about 3 coats of that, making sure that I got into the crevices and to keep the texture. So I grabbed once that was dry, I grabbed my Chateau IOD paint inlay, and this is the first time I'm using this kind of product, so I was a little kind of nervous about it, but I decided that I was just gonna go for it and see what happens. So here I'm just looking for some pieces that I want to use on my sign, and once I got those picked out and established, then I went ahead and grabbed my linen white, just the paint, no baking soda. Here I'm marking that inlay paper so I know exactly where I'm going to put it down at. So I'm going to do one side and then the other. So I grabbed the linen white and I did a fairly heavy coat layer on here, and I'm just making sure I'm going right over those molds as well because I want the inlay paint to get on those molds. Once I got that paint down, I'm going to measure up where I'm going to put that, and then I'm going to start pressing that down. I'm going to spray that fairly heavily because I want that inlay paper to wrap around those molds because I want it to make sure that I get into those crevices. So I'm just using a paper towel to kind of press that in there. I wet the paper down so it would give around those molds, and it did without tearing, so it worked really well. That paper is pretty hardy, so I just did the same thing on the other side. I was really happy how the inlay paper held up to this because I was fairly rough pressing it in there. I've seen other people tear it, but first, I don't know, maybe I was just lucky it held up really well for me. So once I got that where I wanted it, I set it aside and let it dry thoroughly. So once that was dry, I grabbed my spritzer bottle and I sprayed it again. You don't have to spray this really too much, but if you feel it that it's giving resistance, just spray it a little more and it'll come off for you. You could set those aside to dry flat so that you can use them again. I think you can use them like 3 or 4 times with other projects. So once I got that paper off and I let it kind of dry from the water that was there, I grabbed a little spritzer bottle and I mixed 50% of the big top and I mixed the other 50% of water, and I'm putting that in a sprayer to spray that on, because if you try to brush a sealer on, you're take the chance of smearing that inlay paint, and you don't want to do that after you've done all this hard work. So I did 2 really good coats on this, letting it dry in between, and where I felt that it was covered really well. And you're gonna let that dry. While that's drying, I am going to grab my letterpress. I think these are, yeah, typesetting stamps, and I'm going to take the letters out that I want. I'm going to spell the word antique out, and I'm going to use my black IOD ink and stamp that down on my sign. Here you see, because this is the first time that I'm using these stamps, I'm sanding them down, giving them a little kind of texture on there so that the ink will grab to the stamp, and you'll have good coverage. Sometimes if you don't, you get little splotches where the ink will like kind of, you know, gather up together. It won't cover it really well, and you'll have some empty spots, but when you sand it, then it gives it a little tooth for that ink to kind of get into. So once I got that all covered, I adjust my sign to see where I'm going to, making sure that I got that centered as best I can, and I press down. As you can see, I'm holding it with one hand and pressing with the other, making sure that I'm not moving both my hands at the same time, because then you have a risk of moving that and smearing that around. So once I let that black ink set up for about 30 minutes, I'm grabbing that spray of the big top in water again, and I'm doing 2 really good coats over that to seal in that stamping. Once that was dry, I'm grabbing my antiquing wax, and I found these 2 little birds from the birdsong mold that I had laying around, and I'm just antiquing those with some antiquing wax mixed with water, and then I'm gonna set those aside. With the same antiquing wax and water mixture, I'm going over the rest of the sign, making sure that I get into the crevices of those molds, because normally when something ages, it ages more around anything that has some kind of texture to it. So I'm just going over everything and putting on and wiping back until I get it exactly the way that I want it to look. I grab my glue gun and my Titebond, and I'm gonna start to put down the 2 the birds that I found. I ended up putting 3 birds here, and I use the Titebond for a longer term, but it has to set up, and I'm using the glue gun for immediate setup on that. And that's how those turned out. I have a lot of people asking me for this sign, but I only made 1. And I think my mom has dibs on it. I'm not sure, but it's still sitting there, so we'll see. Project 5, I have this old frame. This is a fairly easy project, but it looks labor intensive, but not. So I started by removing the backing, the glass, and I'm gonna wipe it down. I really like this frame because it's wide. You have a lot of surface to work with. So I took that outside, spray painted it black, let it dry, grabbed my Classic Elements mold from IOD, my paper clay, and my Titebond, and I just went to work making some elements, molds that I felt would go really well on this frame. Glued those into place, and I let that dry. And then I took it outside again and spray painted it black to cover those molds. And now I'm going to use my Dixie Belle Patina paint in copper, and I'm going to do a first coat on that and let it dry. I did a really good coat, but I didn't do 100% coverage, only because you are going to do a second coat after this is dry. So you just want to let that dry, and then you're going to go in with a second coat and do a second coat over that. And while your second coat is still wet, you're going to go over it with the patina spray. I use the green here, and I'm using a paintbrush. I'm not spraying it on. I'm using a paintbrush to put that on because I want to make sure that I get it where I want. And the reaction is almost immediate. So you'll see here, and then this is the end result. I did go back and spray this with a clear coat, matte clear coat. So thank you for watching and spending your time with me. I really do appreciate it. And if you, sorry, if you haven't subscribed, please do. And we will see you again.